Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Ready when you are.
Awesome. Today we're going deep into the science of consciousness.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is, what it is, how it works, and how our brains create our unique experience of the world.
We're going to need some serious brain power for this one.
Definitely. And to help us navigate this complex landscape, we're diving into Gerald M. Edelman's Wider Than the Sky, The Phenomenal Gift of Consciousness.
A fantastic book packed with insights.
It really is. So get ready for some serious neuron name dropping, because Edelman doesn't shy away from the complexity.
But he explains it so well.
He really does. Okay, so to kick things off, Edelman dives into this fascinating debate between Darwin and Wallace about how the human brain evolved.
Oh, a scientific showdown.
Exactly. Wallace, brilliant as he was, thought the human brain was just way too complex to have evolved simply for survival.
He argued that early humans didn't need all that brain power for their everyday lives.
Right, like having a supercomputer just to check email.
Exactly. But Darwin, ever the visionary, saw it differently.
Of course he did.
He understood that evolution isn't just about meeting your immediate needs.
It's about having the potential to adapt to future challenges, right?
Exactly. Traits that might seem unnecessary at one point could become crucial for survival later on.
So those extra brain cells were just waiting for their moment to shine.
Precisely. And Edelman picks up where Darwin left off. He says we need a theory that explains how the physical stuff of the brain, neurons firing, chemicals reacting, actually creates the feeling of awareness, the experience of consciousness.
Okay, so how does he propose to do that?
Well, his big idea is called neural Darwinism.
Neural Darwinism.
Yeah.
So is he saying our brains evolve like species do?
In a way, yes. He argues that the brain develops through competition and selection, much like natural selection.
So it's survival of the fittest, but for brain connections.
That's a great way to put it. You're born with this massive network of neurons, but not all of those connections are created equal.
Right, some are stronger than others.
Exactly. The connections you use and reinforce the ones that help you navigate the world, those get stronger.
And the ones that aren't useful fade away.
Precisely. And this process is happening all the time, throughout our lives.
So our brains are constantly rewiring themselves based on our experiences.
That's the beauty of it. Every new experience, everything you learn, reshapes your brain based on what's proving useful.
Okay, that makes sense. But if there's no central program, no control center in the brain, how does everything work together to create this unified experience of consciousness?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question. And this is where things get really interesting. Edelman introduces the concept of re-entry.
Re-entry, like coming back into the atmosphere.
Not quite, but I like the analogy. In Edelman's model, re-entry refers to the constant back-and-forth signaling between different brain regions.
So instead of a solo, it's more like a symphony.
Exactly. There's no single conductor, no one area in charge. It's all about the connections and the constant flow of information between different parts of the brain.
Okay, so how do we visualize this? It sounds pretty abstract.
Edelman uses this great analogy. Imagine a glacier melting and reforming based on the weather.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
As the glacier changes, new rivulets form, connecting different parts of the landscape in new ways.
Yeah.
That's kind of what's happening in your brain.
So our brains are constantly reshaping themselves, creating new connections based on our experiences.
Exactly. And these connections, this re-entry, is what Edelman believes creates our conscious experience.
But are we just talking about sensory information here? Like what we see and hear? What about feelings and emotions? Where do those fit into the picture?
Well, Edelman argues that feelings and emotions are woven into this tapestry of consciousness as well.
Okay, they're not separate.
Not at all. And he highlights a specific part of the brain that plays a key role in all of this. The thalamus.
The thalamus. Remind me what that does again.
Think of it as the brain's sensory control tower. It's a central hub for all the incoming information from your senses.
So everything we experience, sights, sounds, tastes, it all passes through the thalamus.
Precisely. From there, the thalamus relays those signals to specific areas of the cortex, the outer layer of the brain, for further processing.
Okay, so it's like a relay station.
Yes, but here's the twist. The cortex doesn't just passively receive this information. It sends signals right back to the thalamus, creating a dynamic loop.
A two-way street. So it's more of a conversation than a one-way broadcast.
Exactly. This constant back and forth between the thalamus and the cortex, amplified by reentry, is, according to Edelman, at the very heart of conscious experience.
So it's like this incredible dance between different parts of the brain.
It is. Edelman even compares it to a jazz band,
Yeah.
with different brain areas riffing off each other, creating this constantly evolving melody of experience.
I love that analogy. It really captures the dynamic, ever-changing nature of consciousness.
Mm.
But what about memory? Where does that fit into all of this?
That's where things get even more interesting. Edelman argues that memory isn't like a fixed recording. It's not like files stored in a cabinet.
So it's not like a video replay of our experiences.
Not quite. Remember that glacier analogy? He suggests that memory is more like the ever-shifting patterns of that glacier, constantly being shaped and reshaped by new experiences.
So memories are more like a dynamic process, a living, breathing entity that's constantly evolving.
Exactly. Each memory is linked to a whole web of associations, and those associations are constantly evolving based on new experiences and even our current emotional state.
That makes a lot of sense. It explains why our memories can be so fluid and sometimes even change over time. But if our memories are constantly evolving, how do we develop a stable sense of self? How do we know who we are from one moment to the next?
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the most profound aspects of Edelman's theory. The idea that our sense of self emerges from this dynamic interplay of brain activity, memory, and experience. But to really understand how that works, we need to explore something called value systems.
Value systems,
Yeah.
like our morals and beliefs.
Not exactly. These value systems are more like your brain's inner compass, guiding you toward things that feel good and away from things that feel bad.
So it's about what we're drawn to, what we avoid.
Exactly. They're driven by specific chemicals and brain regions, and they play a huge role in shaping our learning and behavior.
So these value systems are like built-in preferences that influence how we experience the world.
You got it. They're constantly evaluating incoming information, helping to determine which neural connections get strengthened and which ones fade away.
It's like our brains are always making choices, even at the subconscious level.
Exactly. And these value systems, combined with our unique memories and experiences, are crucial for developing our sense of self. But we'll dive deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive.
This is already blowing my mind. It's incredible to think that all of these things, neural connections, sensory information, memories, and even built-in preferences, are working together to create our conscious experience. It sounds like Edelman is weaving together evolution, brain anatomy, and even psychology into this grand theory of consciousness.
He absolutely is, and that brings us to a critical point. The emergence of consciousness itself.
Okay, I'm ready for the next level.
Edelman shows that a key evolutionary event occurred sometime between reptiles and mammals.
Ooh, this sounds big. What happened?
A massive increase in the complexity of the thalamocortical system.
The thalamus and the cortex. Those brain regions we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Specifically, the emergence of massively re-entrant connections between the cortex and the thalamus. Remember all those back and forth conversations?
Like a supercharged dialogue between different brain regions.
Exactly. And this explosion of connections, according to Edelman, is what allowed for the emergence of what we call consciousness.
Wow. So all those complex interactions filtered through our value systems and shaped by memory. It all comes together in this thalamocortical loop to create, well, us.
You're getting it. And remember, this whole system is incredibly dynamic. New perceptual categories are constantly being formed, integrated with memories, and shaping future actions. It's all happening in this incredibly short window of time.
And Edelman calls this
The remembered present. It highlights the dynamic interaction between memory and ongoing perception that gives rise to our sense of now.
So everything we experience is a blend of the past and the present, constantly shaping who we are in this very moment.
That's the beauty of Edelman's theory. It captures the incredible complexity of consciousness while grounding it in the physical reality of our brains.
This is seriously mind-blowing. But hold on, we haven't even talked about subjective experiences yet, those unique feelings and sensations that make up our inner world. How does Edelman explain those?
That's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be exploring the fascinating realm of qualia, those subjective qualities of experience that make consciousness so mysterious and intriguing.
I can't wait. Listeners, stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into Wider Than the Sky, where we'll explore how Edelman tackles one of the most perplexing aspects of consciousness, what it actually feels like to be you. All right, so we've laid this amazing foundation of neural connections and dynamic loops happening in our brains.
Our brains are busy places.
They really are. But I think what a lot of us really want to know is, what if the feeling of being conscious, like the actual experience of seeing red or tasting chocolate.
Hmm.
How does Edelman explain that?
Ah, that's where we get to one of the most mind-boggling parts of Edelman's work, the concept of qualia.
Qualia. That sounds a little intimidating.
It might sound like something out of a philosophy textbook,
It does.
but it's really about the most basic elements of our conscious experience.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about the color red.
Okay, red.
You can describe its wavelength, how it's perceived by the eye.
The science behind it.
Right, but can you truly explain what it feels like to experience redness? That's qualia, the subjective, what it's like to be conscious.
So qualia is the feeling itself, not the scientific explanation.
Exactly. Like the difference between reading about a strawberry and actually tasting its sweetness.
Ooh, yeah, I'm starting to get it.
And Edelman believes that qualia are not some mystical add-on to brain activity.
They're not.
Nope. They arise directly from those complex neural processes we were talking about, especially within what he calls the dynamic core.
Okay, remind me what the dynamic core is again.
Remember all those back and forth connections between the thalamus and the cortex, all that re-entry?
Right, the brain's jazz band.
Exactly. Well, the dynamic core is where that action really heats up, creating a kind of internal landscape for qualia to exist and interact.
So it's like the stage where all these feelings and sensations are playing out.
That's a great way to visualize it. Edelman even uses the term qualia space to describe this internal world.
Qualia space. So like a landscape of feeling.
Imagine a multidimensional space where each point represents a unique qual.
Okay, I'm trying to picture this.
The color red would be one point, the sound of a violin another, the taste of chocolate another, and so on.
So our brains are like constantly surfing through this massive qualia space, creating our unique stream of consciousness.
You got it. And the amazing thing is that qualia space isn't static. It's constantly changing and expanding based on our experiences and interactions with the world.
So the more we experience, the more nuanced and detailed our internal world becomes.
Precisely. It's like we're literally adding new dimensions to our consciousness as we learn and grow.
That's incredible. It's like our brains are these ever-expanding universes of experience. But if all this is happening in our brains, how do those experiences translate into actions in the real world? How do we go from feeling something to actually doing something?
Ah, that's a great question. And it gets to the heart of the classic mind-body problem.
Oh boy, here we go.
How does an idea, a feeling, an experience in our minds actually cause a physical action in the real world? Edelman tackles this by distinguishing between two levels. C, which represents conscious experience itself, and C prime, which represents the underlying neural activity.
So C is the feeling, and C prime is the physical process in the brain.
Exactly, like software and hardware.
Okay, that makes sense. But how are they connected?
Well, the key point here is that while C prime, the neural activity, is what directly causes our actions, C, the conscious experience, acts as a reliable indicator of those states.
Okay, so C prime is calling the shots, but C is letting us know what's going on.
You got it. It's like C prime is the engine and C is the dashboard.
I like that analogy, but it still seems a little fuzzy. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine you're walking through a forest and you see a beautiful butterfly.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Your brain processes the visual information, recognizes the pattern,
Sees a butterfly.
right, and triggers a feeling of awe and delight.
Okay, got it.
You don't consciously experience all the intricate neural calculations happening in your brain,
Thank goodness.
but you do experience the outcome, the feeling itself.
So the feeling of awe is like a summary report of all that brain activity.
Exactly. It's a way for your brain to communicate with itself, creating a unified sense of self and agency.
So even though our brains are doing all this complex stuff behind the scenes, we still have this sense of me experiencing it all.
Exactly. But if C is just a readout, does that mean it's powerless? Are we just along for the ride as our brains make all the decisions?
That's what I was wondering. What about free will?
That's where Edelman pushes back against the idea that consciousness is just a side effect with no real influence.
It does.
He argues that while C may not directly cause actions, it plays a crucial role in shaping our future behavior.
So our feelings and experiences actually matter. They're not just passive byproducts.
Exactly. Remember those value systems we talked about?
Our brain's inner compass.
Right. Well, C provides feedback that refines and adjusts those systems over time.
So if I keep choosing to eat broccoli even though I don't love it, my value system might eventually shift to make me actually crave it.
It's possible. Our conscious experiences, the pleasure we feel from a good meal, the pain we feel from a stubbed toe, All of that feeds back into the system, shaping our future choices and actions.
So consciousness isn't just about experiencing the world, it's about learning and adapting and becoming who we are.
Exactly. Our consciousness helps us navigate the world more effectively.
That's actually really empowering. It means we're not just passive machines. We have the ability to influence our own destinies.
Hmm.
But Edelman goes even further, doesn't he? He links all of this to our sense of self.
He does. He argues that this capacity for subjective experience, this qualia-rich C state, is fundamental to how we develop a sense of self.
So our self isn't some separate entity. It emerges from all these complex brain processes we've been talking about.
You got it. And Edelman highlights the importance of higher order consciousness for developing a robust sense of self.
Okay, another level up. What does that mean?
Higher order consciousness is the ability to be aware of being aware.
Whoa, that's deep.
It is. It's what allows us to reflect on our own thoughts and feelings, to understand ourselves as individuals within a larger social context.
So it's like stepping back and observing our own stream of consciousness, being aware that I am having this thought, this feeling.
Exactly. It's a pretty amazing ability when you think about it. And Edelman believes that this higher order consciousness is what truly sets humans apart from other animals.
It's what makes us human.
It's what allows us to plan for the future, engage in abstract thought, and create complex social structures. But all of this leads to a really big question.
I bet I know what it is. If our brains are just physical systems, does that mean we're just robots with fancy programming?
That's the one. Where does free will fit into all of this? It's a question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries.
And what does Edelman say?
Well, he doesn't shy away from it. He argues against both extremes, pure determinism, where we're just puppets of our biology, and mystical free will, where our mind somehow exists outside the laws of physics.
So he's looking for a middle ground.
Exactly. He believes that consciousness, while not a force that can defy physics, gives us the capacity to make choices based on our unique experiences and values.
So we're shaped by our biology, but not entirely bound by it. There's still room for choice.
That's the idea. Our brains provide the framework, but our conscious experiences, our interactions with the world, they shape our individual paths.
That's actually really empowering. It means we're not just passive machines. We have the ability to influence our own destinies. But this brings up another question. If all this neural activity is happening constantly, how do we experience a seamless flow of consciousness?
That is a good question.
Why doesn't it feel like a bunch of separate, disconnected moments?
That's a fascinating question. And it gets to the heart of how our brains create a sense of continuity and coherence over time.
So how do they do it?
Edelman argues that it's achieved through a combination of re-entry, which we've already talked about, and something he calls temporal succession.
Okay, so more of those back and forth brain conversations and something to do with time. I'm intrigued.
Remember how re-entry involves constant communication between different brain regions?
Right, the brain's never-ending conversation.
Well, temporal succession refers to the brain's ability to link together events that happen in close proximity.
Creating a sense of flow and continuity.
Exactly. So even though individual neural events are distinct, the brain weaves them together into a continuous experience.
Kind of like how a film is made of individual frames, but we experience it as a smooth, flowing story.
That's a great analogy. And re-entry plays a crucial role here as well. By constantly integrating information from different brain areas, it helps to create a unified and coherent experience of time.
So it's like the brain is constantly weaving a tapestry of experience, pulling together threads from the past, present, and even anticipating the future.
A beautiful image. But with all this incredible complexity happening in our brains, how do we decide what to focus on? How does attention work in Edelman's model?
Yeah, how do we not get overwhelmed by all that information?
Well, Edelman suggests that attention is not a single mechanism, but rather a collection of processes that help us focus our awareness.
So there are different ways of paying attention.
Exactly. Sometimes we're loosely aware of our surroundings, and other times we're laser focused on a single task.
Like right now, I'm trying to pay attention to our conversation, but I can also hear the birds outside.
Precisely. Edelman proposes different levels of attention, ranging from a diffuse awareness of the environment to a highly focused state where we're completely absorbed in a single activity.
Okay, but how do these different levels of attention actually work? What's happening in the brain?
Edelman suggests that the thalamus plays a crucial role. Remember how we described it as the brain's sensory control tower?
The grand central station of the brain.
Exactly. Well, it also acts as a gatekeeper, filtering incoming information and directing it to the appropriate cortical areas.
So the thalamus is deciding what gets our attention. like a filter on our email inbox.
That's a great analogy. And Edelman also suggests that the basal ganglia, those structures involved in motor control and habit formation, are involved in directing attention by modulating activity in different cortical areas.
It sounds like a real team effort, with different brain regions working together to focus our awareness.
It is. But with so much happening below the level of consciousness, how do we even know what to pay attention to in the first place?
Yeah, what determines what breaks through to our conscious awareness?
That's another excellent question, and it leads us to the fascinating boundary between conscious and unconscious processes.
The conscious and the unconscious. Are we going Freudian here?
Not quite, but Edelman does acknowledge that the vast majority of brain activity actually happens below the level of conscious awareness.
So we're only aware of the tip of the iceberg. Like there's this whole hidden world of brain activity going on that we're not even privy to.
Exactly. And Edelman points to specific brain structures that play a key role in mediating this divide, particularly the basal ganglia. Remember how they're involved in automating learned behaviors?
Right, like walking and talking and all those things we do without really thinking about them.
Well, he believes they also help to free up conscious resources for more complex tasks.
So things like walking, talking, even driving a car, those all become automatic thanks to the basal ganglia. It's like they're running in the background so our conscious minds can focus on other things.
Precisely. This frees up the dynamic core, with all its qualia and higher-order consciousness, to tackle the big challenges: planning, problem-solving, creative thinking.
It's like a division of labor in the brain, with conscious and unconscious processes working together to help us navigate the world.
A beautiful partnership.
It is. But we've covered so much ground already, from qualia and free will to the role of the basal ganglia and the nature of attention. Where does Edelman go from here? Does he leave us with any final thoughts, any big takeaways from his exploration of consciousness?
He does. And they're some of the most profound and challenging ideas in the entire book. Edelman wants us to see consciousness not as a static thing, but as a dynamic process, a constant evolution and refinement. And one of the most powerful forces shaping that process is something uniquely human: language.
Language. So we're not just talking about neurons and brain regions anymore. We're bringing culture into the mix.
Exactly. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how Edelman connects language to consciousness, and how this uniquely human ability has profoundly shaped our experience of the world and ourselves.
Okay, so we've explored the brain's hardware.
All those incredible neural loops and qualia spaces.
Right. Now we're bringing in the software language.
It's not just software, it's what makes us human.
Exactly. But how does Edelman connect something as complex as language to the mystery of consciousness?
It all comes down to higher order consciousness.
That awareness of being aware.
Right. Edelman argues that language isn't just a communication tool.
It's more than that.
He believes it's fundamentally intertwined with our ability to have that higher order consciousness, that sense of self that exists in the past, present, and future.
So you're saying that without language, we wouldn't have that level of self-awareness.
It's a bold claim.
It is.
But think about it. Language allows us to categorize and conceptualize our experiences.
Put things into words.
Exactly. In ways that no other animal can. It's like language gave our brains a software upgrade.
Unlocking these powerful cognitive abilities.
Precisely. But this raises another question.
How did something as complex as language evolve in the first place? It seems like such a huge leap.
Edelman suggests it started with simpler forms of communication.
Like what?
Gestures, vocalizations.
So like a proto-language.
Exactly. Think about how much we can communicate with just a look or a hand gesture.
That's true. A lot can be said without words.
This gesture-first theory suggests that using our hands for communication might have even freed them up for more sophisticated tool use.
Leading to further brain development.
It's like this incredible feedback loop. Language shaping the brain, and the brain, in turn, shaping language.
It makes sense. But how does language actually work in Edelman's model? How does speaking or writing a sentence connect to all those neural loops and qualia?
Well, Edelman suggests that language acts as a bridge between our inner world of qualia
All those feelings and sensations.
and the external world we share with others. When we use language, we're not just transmitting information.
We're doing something more.
We're evoking feelings, memories, associations, all those points in qualia space that make up our unique experience.
So every word we speak or write is like a little window into our own personal qualia space.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And when someone else understands us, they're kind of peering into that space, sharing that experience with us.
Exactly. Language allows us to share those inner landscapes,
The things that make us who we are.
the things that would otherwise be locked away inside our own heads.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. All thanks to language.
And this brings us to one of Edelman's most important points. Consciousness is not a fixed thing.
It can change.
It's a dynamic process that can evolve and expand throughout our lives.
That we're not stuck with the consciousness we're born with.
Not at all. We can shape and mold it through our experiences, and language plays a huge role in that.
That's pretty empowering. It means we have more control over our own minds than we might realize.
And Edelman takes this idea even further.
Where does he go from there?
He suggests that if we can understand how consciousness arises from the physical matter of our brains, we might be able to create conscious machines.
Whoa, AI with consciousness. Like machines that can actually experience the world the way we do.
That's the idea. It's both exciting and a little bit terrifying.
It is. If we create conscious machines, what responsibilities do we have to them?
That's a huge ethical question that we'll need to grapple with as technology continues to advance.
It's a question for the future.
But Edelman's work gives us a framework for thinking about these issues. It helps us see that consciousness in all its complexity and mystery
The biggest mystery of all.
is ultimately a product of the natural world,
Something we can understand.
a phenomenon that we can begin to understand and explore through the tools of science.
Well, this has been an incredible journey. Edelman's book really pushes us to think about who we are
How our minds work.
and what our place is in the universe.
It's a challenging read, but it's so worth it.
It really is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the science of consciousness. It's been an incredible journey.
Exploring the most fascinating phenomenon in the universe, the human mind.
We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the mysteries of the world around us. Thanks for listening, everybody.